For me? Thank you. Really, though, thank you all for being here this morning. And a big thank you to Aaron Flannery and Ikeem Creative for their partnership on this program. We're in for quite a treat. My name is Anna Dilliard. I'm the manager of programming here at MIA. And just a little background, when I was approached about this program by Aaron, I was excited for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, it's June and I'm gay, so it felt fitting. I thought about making a joke about the gay agenda, but I wasn't sure. But I saw a lot of you walk in, and I think it would have went well, so. But I'm not only queer, I'm also the daughter of a lighting designer. So I grew up in just about every theater in the Twin Cities, as well as some in Boston, La Jolla, and Spoleto. I'm luckier than a lot of people to have spent my formative years in an environment that encouraged self-expression and practiced radical acceptance. Seeing works like Cabaret, Spring Awakening, and of course, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, there was no world in which I wasn't comfortable being me. Obviously, those stories contain ups and downs, but you understand. These playwrights shared stories that paved the way for me to exist as I am today, and wave to my lovely wife in the audience. So, you can see why I'm thrilled to be joined by writer, director, and two-time Tony Award-winning artist John Cameron Mitchell for this special program. John is best known for the long-running rock musical Hedwig and the Angry Inch, starring himself as Hedwig and co-written with composer Stephen Trask. I hope you all have tickets for the 25th anniversary screening this evening. John is also the executive producer of the 2004 film Tarnation, which won Best Documentary from the National Society of Film Critics, the Independent Spirit Awards, and the Gotham Awards. He directed the 2006 indie film Short Bus and the 2010 drama Rabbit Hole, starring Nicole Kidman. He's directed music videos for Bright Eyes and the Scissor Sisters, and has held prominent roles on TV shows like Girls, The Sandman, and Yellow Jackets. Other key projects include young adult romance film How to Talk to Girls at Parties, Hulu's Shrill, and his 2019 musical co-written with Brian Weller as a fictional podcast series titled Anthem Homunculus. Most recently, you've seen him as the star of Oh Mary on Broadway. Perhaps my favorite role, though, John is a passionate advocate for the LGBTQ community. So today, John shares a special sneak peek into his in-development theatrical work, LSM, the initials used by artists and lifelong partners Claude Cahun and Marcel Moore, who you saw some images of earlier. He'll be blending personal reflection with performance excerpts, all exploring Cahun and Moore's radical approach to self-portraiture, authorship, and identity, and how their acts of resistance during World War II continue to resonate in contemporary conversations about art, gender, and power, particularly relevant today. Please join me in welcoming John Cameron Mitchell.
Hi. Hi, guys. Claude Cahun was always in my periphery after I made Hedwig. It was funny because there were things that filtered through Hedwig that I didn't know anything about, but were definitely from the same well, like Lee Bowery, like Hannah Hoch, who we have an expert today, a Dada female artist, and Claude Cahun. I did a festival called the Highline Festival that David Bowie curated in the early 2000s, and he presented I guess I have to turn off my Wi-Fi. Okay. But I guess there was a sense of fear about Claude for many years because as you'll find out, she worked with her wife, in effect, Marcel Moore, in the early part of the 20th century. And as women had to a hard scrabble up that hill of the boys' club of the avant-garde in Paris, even though there was a strong lesbian foundation. They were younger and not always looked up to because Claude was actually a bit of a Nepo baby in that her uncle Marcel Schwab, a translator of Oscar Wilde, was quite famous. In the time that she grew up, literally the year that modernism began in the theater with the play Ubu Roi by Alfred Jarry, and that was a very prescient piece that happened in 1896 that preceded what we might know as Dada. Now, Dada was an amazing, oh, no, I've messed everything up. Dada was an amazing time where people were dying in the millions. Sorry, this is very homemade. They were dying in the millions because of the technology, the advances during war. And you had people like Hannah Höch here in Berlin creating an art form that was almost like, if the war was so nonsensical, let the art be nonsensical too. But of course, underneath the nonsense was this strange, it feels like punk, doesn't it? It's postmodern in the first way, before modernism even was fully formed. And it was taking bits and pieces of other parts of culture, putting them together in a cut-up kind of method with these photo montages, which I think are more like collages. To our left, we have an altar boy to Dada in Paris, which is André Breton. He later sort of deemed himself the Pope of Surrealism. There's Dali, of course, and René Crevel, a lesser-known but amazing queer writer. So in effect, we have this sense of possibility that's exploded through Claude and Marcel's world. They grew up together as friends, and you had a sense of openness. As World War I was ending, there was a strange sense of everything was horrifying and everything was possible. You got very moral artists talking about fascism, especially in murals like this. You had Man Ray having fun with sex. You had, that was André Kertész. You had Hans Bellmer talking about women in a very metaphoric way. How were they seen by society? You had The Exquisite Corpse. As Dada was dying, as it was designed to do, like punk, Malcolm McLaren said, punk's job is to self-destruct, to make room for new things. And the post-punk of the time was surrealism. Now, Dada was more of a kind of a heady and emotional cavalcade of associations, whereas surrealism, in a way, was a hate child of Dada and Freud. Meaning your first impulse, first thought, best thought. That's why they did seances. That's why they wrote automatically. That's why they deranged their senses in the way that Rimbaud taught them to in the earlier century. He was kind of a prototype of certainly symbolism, but then later those things morphed into Dada and Surrealism. So it honored sex over love, for example, dreams over reality. And the Exquisite Corpse game, of course, one artist would draw the head of a figure, they'd fold it over so the next artist couldn't see it, and the next artist would draw the body, and then the next artist would draw the legs, and you would just see little lines that you would continue, and that's an example of one of the earlier Exquisite Corpses. You had female surrealists like Lenora Carrington here. This is going to be a model for a character in my play. Oscar Schlemmer, doing amazing stuff with geometry in the 20s. Jean Cocteau, Ethel Calhoun, a female surrealist working more after the war. That's her again. Two penises or two knees with a vagina in the middle. You decide. Remember, we see what we want to. And then there was Claude and Marcel, working with photography and working with photo montage, as they called it, or photo collage. Here's an example of some automatic writing. Ah, look, the woman is the secretary. So imagine Claude when there's Dora Maar. A lot of the women artists were first muses to the famous people. This was the mate of Picasso, who was a little bit in the shadow, very much in the shadow, but were making their own stuff that was quite brilliant too. Another exquisite corpse. Andre Kertész, who worked with mirrors. I have all scans of all these, not prints, that's for sure. This woman made an art piece out of herself. What was her name again? Yeah, you know her, the Dada. She was like a countess or something. She's like, I'm a work of art. There's Hannah Höch again. There's John Hartfield, who was right before Hitler came in, was already doing this. So there's strange intimations of today. This is another sculpture that might inform the narrator's outfit in my play. There's my executive producer, all the investors. I don't know who they are. And so this is what she was walking in. Talk about, you know, cutting the umbilical cord, right? It's difficult. I always think of like, this is the most horrifying. Remember when the Christians were like, heaven is where you'll be with your family for eternity. They needed better branding. So this was the world that they stepped into, right? There's Dali, of course, friends of fascists in the future, but definitely a power artistically. So this is what they walked into, right? Now imagine being 14, your parents being quite literary, your mother being schizophrenic and highly educated and abusive, your father being a newspaper publisher who was very important in Nantes. Oh, there's my show. And they stepped into a new world. They stepped into Paris in the 20s, between the war, where women were suddenly, because the war had forced a lot of women into roles they weren't used to, in many ways, because the men were off dying, you had la garçonne. Le garçon is the French for boy. La garçonne is the female version of boy. So there was a whole new aesthetic happening between the wars, especially, that was highly androgynous, very exciting for a young lesbian couple whose parents had married, so they were stepsisters, which became the envy of closeted lesbian couples the world over. So there, like, the idea of female empowerment was beginning in the arts world. It was still very tough, and Claude and Marcel worshipped a lot of these male artists and tried to meet them through letters of introduction. They were a little bit horrified. I mean, wouldn't you be if you met someone who looked like this, walking into your cafe with self-possession, with taste, with works under their belt, and women? The first time Breton saw them, he went out the back, but later was forced by her talent, their talent, to respect them, bring them in, and in fact, there was a great deal of affection between Claude, Marcel, and Breton. Now, at the same time, Claude is experiencing the real world. You know, during the Dreyfus affair, the extreme anti-Semitic episode in around the turn of the century in France, she was tied up by her schoolmates at age 7 or 8 and pelted with stones because she was Jewish. So very early on, she understood this was a dangerous place. Her mother was abusive, was sent to an institution. Her name was Antoinette Schwab, so she could see why she was unhappy. She was like, I'm not a Schwab, I'm not Jewish, you are. Claude was half Jewish, her father was Jewish. And they had enough money to, take her out of school, send her to England and get her better. But here's a little piece from a little monologue, or a couple of pieces from my play, LSM, about them. The narrator is their cat, which they loved. And the Egyptians, apparently, when favored cats died, they would, in honor of them, shave their eyebrows. And Claude, in a way, did that and shaved everything else. So their cat's name was Nike, the goddess of victory, and that's our narrator in that very surrealist outfit, which you can open compartments in their costume and maybe pull out a bottle of wine, a couple of glasses. So Nike says, by age 15, Lucy had gone full lesbohemian teen queen bitch. By that point, she'd already studied Buddhism, taken opium, inhaled ether, and embarked on a program of suicidal ideation so imaginative that she forgot to implement it. So instead, she wrote. Claude talks to us. Know thyself is written at the Temple of Delphi, but my motto is, don't know thyself. Because once thou dost, thou art done. You stop evolving. Fuck identity. Identity is a barcode. Yes, the future is somewhat accessible to me. And identity is a capitalist concept, because once they force you into one, then they can sell you things, including your own identity. So Nike, stop telling me what I am. Nike says, and stop trying to be human. Fine. God. Nike goes into narrator mode. Your only concession to society is that you enjoy displeasuring yourself with a routine inventory of your defects. Claude says, I do. I really do. Nike uses a laser pointer built into her glove to point out teen Claude's defects in video. Redundant breasts, irregular teeth, eyes and hair of the blandest color, the oval head of a slave, the exemplary nose, an exemplary nose for its type being a hideous one, a barely sketched-in chin, the mouth too sensual, pleasing when you're hungry, but once you've eaten, it makes you want to vomit. Nike says, but the greatest advantage in knowing that you are so undesirable to others as to be stillborn, Claude's like, stillborn, is that you are able to avoid the path that has been laid out for you as a female. Let us praise the exquisite freedom of fair to middling women. She points, and a second Claude emanates out of her like an astral projection and starts to touch her most erogenous zones. While Claude says, love, overly happy lovers are nothing but incestuous Siamese twins. Repellent. Individualism, certainly. I have no time to lose in achieving my own orgasm. The two Claudes merge together, triggering a volcanic orgasm. And as I can attest today, can't nobody do me like me. So that's where we find her in her teens. Then she meets Suzanne. Now, Lucy Schwab was her name, given name, and Suzanne Malherbe was Marcel's name. They took their names and put them together. See the LSM and this little exquisite corpse. And of those who speak French, what does LSM sound like in French? Said quickly. LSM. means they love each other. So that was their little code. And they would sign letters to each other, à l'autre moi. I'm going to do a little scene between them in a second. But when they finally met, they decided that they were two halves of the same whole. Claude did a wonderful monologue, group of monologues called Heroines, and she took famous women and fictional women and imagined what they were really thinking. And they were quite funny, like the Virgin Mary, who we forget is a Jewish mother. But Claude didn't. And in her monologue, it's like, Jesus was a child who gave birth to the world, having violated his own mother. It was not funny, especially the halo. Not funny. All of human suffering is but a pinprick compared to my suffering. Jewish mother, anyone? Yeah. Works for Korean mothers, too. Try that. Every Jewish mother joke works for Korean mothers. So, in fact, why don't we go ahead and do this scene where they meet? Let me bring up Alan Cumming to join me. Alan he's been working for no money all weekend for me. We should probably look at this together. Yeah. I don't have mine. So what's happening here, this is where they first meet, Claude and Marcel, or at least where they meet as adults, because as children they would go to the Isle of Jersey, which is in the English Channel, for holidays, and their families were friendly, and they would, play on the beach. And then at a certain point, Claude is going through all this hell, and, Suzanne is watching it from afar, and Claude is 16, and Marcel is a more sophisticated 18. So I'll do Nikkei and then Claude. Okay, so Nikkei says, but then again, there is Suzanne, so quickly. The girls had played together on a Jersey beach, but now they are grown and free to choose. Life and death are open to me. I am on the tip of my own tongue.
Is there room for more than one?
I doubt it.
Lucy, have you finally become what you wanted to be when you grew up? A narcissist?
Naturally, I only believe in what I want.
And what would that be?
I want to hunt myself down.
What are your thoughts about romantic love?
I can take it or leave it. I've learned that one soul in tune with one body is enough to make love.
What soul and whose body?
The Greeks say that equals cannot love each other. They move in parallel lines and will never converge, and by the Greeks I mean me.
Perhaps not in geometry, but they do to the human eye.
How so?
They converge at the horizon.
Never noticed.
You should get out more. A horizon is best shared. Speaking of infinity, how do you feel about God?
God is me. I mean, of course, not as I am, but obviously as I should be.
Absolute goodness, absolute power, or absolutely irreducible, like the atom?
Well, I've seen God broken off into shards to be sucked like candy, or wielded like daggers. I am the only irreducible thing. Am I already God?
Well, are you not made in his image?
I am, but few knew that on the 8th day, God developed regrets and decided to destroy us. He was disappointed to find we had already fallen into the public domain.
Brava, Lucy. Now let us return to the subject of romantic love.
I find love dulls with use.
How would you know?
But friendship is an art, always to be perfected, never ending.
Are you proposing to me as a friend? Lucy, have you never had a real lover?
Suzanne, have you never had a real friend?
I go by Marcel now.
Oh, my uncle's name?
Very same, a name for all genders.
Sadly, he passed before we could converse as equals.
Equals? Marcel Schwab was a great writer, and if I'm not mistaken, a close collaborator of Oscar Wilde.
Are you a star fucker?
No. It's you that I'm interested in.
Are you calling me ordinary?
Are you afraid of that?
Sometimes I feel I should have been born a boy. Does that shock you?
Me? Certainly not. You weren't born just any boy, I trust.
And considering taking the name Claude.
Very nice. It also works for all genders.
Yes, and Cahun, which means priest. Claude Cahun, the name of a true invert.
Invert?
Yes, I know, it's a ridiculous term, and homosexual is reductive. I prefer Uranian.
Why?
Because it was Plato's term for our people, which he derived from the god Uranus, who liked to give birth by mixing his sperm with sea foam, a kind of primordial cream pie.
Huh. But Uranian is only used for men. You reject Sapphist? Lesbian?
We can't even vote in this country. I'm talking about people with options. Men who conquered their worlds like Wilde, Whitman, and Gide. Heretics who remade theirs like Rimbaud and Jarry. And the punks who will eventually create their own. Genet, Burroughs, and Bowie. These are my kind of men.
But could you love them?
They make space for me to love.
You haven't answered my question.
I'm 16 years old.
When I was quite young, I met a girl. She was wounded by her mother and often left to herself until one day she was tied to a tree and hurt by her schoolmates, whom she hoped against hope were her friends. But as she grew, oh no, that's you. Oh, that's me. But as she grew, she did not fall. Oh, she might have cut herself to lend her pain a time and place. She might have inhaled ether and drifted down the river like Ophelia. But she clung to outcroppings, songs of heroes, armies made of lovers. From a distance, I watched this girl drag herself from the deep and raise herself as her own, not, like me, without a care, but in spite of every care in the world. And I, who have been loved perhaps too much, wish to lend what is left over to one who needs it, for it is the unloved who change the world.
Well, art has been my lover.
But isn't art really the sad and tender attempt to recall love that is passing before one's very eyes?
They kiss.
Oh, forgive me.
No. I just hope I hope I don't become your life's work.
Lucy, I forgive you for all you will put me through.
And I forgive you for what you will do to me, even if you leave. Oh, Marcel.
Yes, dear, I'm right here.
My goddess, courtship, engagement, and wedding all in one encounter. Hello, U-Haul. All right, now this is where it all happens, right? Of course it doesn't happen because it's homemade. They started making work together. They had a great cover of being stepsisters. They moved to Paris, got their own apartment. They had some funny money, Claude's obsession with gay men was made flesh. This is a role that she played, named Monsieur, in a play. She started doing theater. They started shooting stuff in their own apartment. And of course, who was taking the photographs? Marcel. Because they were never published or sold, there was no real credit involved. So people think of Claude as a one-woman show, but in fact, Marcel was very much her collaborator in this work. So you saw a kind of homemade, queerdo, Alan Cumming here. I always think of this, this is a famous image, or at least this group of images where she is I love this, is very like, okay, the beginning of goth in 1925. And there was a sense of we are all fungible. Again, her suspicion of ideas, of even pronouns. She said masculine, feminine. It depends on the moment I'm in. Don't pin me down, which is, of course, what capitalism loves to do. And she was very suspicious of that as well. They started making this stuff. This is them in Jersey at the church right next to them. It's a perfect example. The blank mask of their aesthetic and the double exposure. So, and the cats were always there, the dolls, the doll hands. That was maybe her last photograph, I believe, that she sent to André Breton before she died. Again, this I am in training, don't kiss me, kind of reminds me of Gen Z. But the training has gone on far too long. It's very understandable that you don't want to enter in on the economy of this world, moral or otherwise, and stay in your bed and stay on your phone and not get laid and not do anything much except think, and have fun in your own smaller way. But it's not so much about IRL anymore. And COVID certainly didn't help. This was the one image that was published in a magazine, which I actually have. In the play, Marcel says, "You're letting your fame go to your head." She's like, what? She's like, what fame? I love that one. I kept trying to find that rock, couldn't find it. So I did travel to where they lived, in Nantes, in Paris, in Jersey. They were making their work. I love this one. This was in Trafalgar Square. She took that. That's a female surrealist named Sheila Legge. These are among my favorites. But they're just shooting in the rock pools, But talk about a liminal, artists. I mean, literally testing the edges of everything. And that's her as Satan. In a play, there she is as Satan, too, on the left. And a very challenging figure to the avant-gardists of the moment, even though there was people experimenting all the time. So they did try to connect with these surrealists, but as you can see here, oh look, there's Claude cropped out again. It was partly because she was not interested in fame or money, she was interested in the art. So she created a piece called, a book called Aveux non avenus, which meant canceled confessions or disavowals. And a lot of the art in this book was quite extraordinary. And it was using their photography, but cutting it up into a montage-like space. And Marcel was in charge of this. She was credited in one of them. But some of the photography you just saw has been, cut up and photographed here. And again, the mannequin, there's lots of little Easter eggs as you get to know their lives and work. there was constantly a sense of, see, like here's a little photograph that you might have seen earlier, and they're often messing with reality and with association. So there was a real sense of, I love this one. I mean, I think she used her own X-ray here, which was not common. The flayed man at the bottom, I've always loved, which will not zoom. There it is. You know, it's like, it's just constant, all this sort of code. She used to call herself Claude Curlew, which this is the bird, the curlew, because her nose looked like that. This is Henri Michaud, a famous surrealist artist who they loved deeply. So they started connecting to the surrealists. This one is the most punk, look at that. And it's fascinating because at the time the surrealists were trying to connect themselves to the Soviet communists, the Stalinists, because they seemed to, especially Louis Aragon, René Crevel, they thought that this was their savior from Nazism, was Stalin. So, for example, Aragon got into a fight with Claude saying, well, you're a bourgeois Nepo baby. Who do you write for? She's like, I write for whoever can read. I write against myself, really. It's like, well, you have the luxury to do that. You need to be, everything has to be for the revolution. And she's like, it sounds like you're talking about propaganda. Propaganda is a different thing. It's advertising, right? It can be elegant, it can be stupid, but generally it's telling you what to think because it's trying to sell you something. Art, at its best, is not doing that. It's presenting a situation that it requires you to interpret and make a decision about. It doesn't force it on you. And that's why it's more effective than propaganda. And he was like another, bourgeois, whatever. And the same kind of things can happen, let's say, when we're talking about political correctness. You're not fighting the fight you're supposed to fight in the way that we want you to, therefore you're out, you're canceled. There was a certain amount of that going on amongst artists. Of course, not fully, because it was a very free-flowing time politically. There were fascists and neo-monarchists, there were socialists, there were communists, there were kind of middle-of-the-roaders, and they were all fighting. They were fighting in the streets, And Claude was very aware of that and very aware of the danger of fascism. This is another gorgeous one, beautifully put together. So her view was a kind of like more internal one. Perhaps the yoga, the Eastern mysticism was more like, I'm going to work on myself here while the outer world might have burned slightly. But her experience with anti-Semitism and with the rising fascism made her very active in anti-fascist groups. Here's the one credit that Marcel had in et al. Moore right here. This is actually a restoration, I love this, a restoration of the original maquette where they cut out the pictures and put it on a piece of paper. Then they photographed that, right, for the final. This, in Australia, they found the original one and they restored it, which is why it's in color, and the others aren't. So they moved to Paris. All of this was happening. The Nazis were coming. All hell was breaking loose. And they were doing their thing, but they realized things were changing. So they were now approaching 50-ish. They decided to retire to the Isle of Jersey, where they started becoming friends. A beautiful island closer to France than England that is a British territory. So here's where it is, if you don't know. Only 14 miles from Normandy. So the actual island was gorgeous. They lived there. They had a sense of joy. This was their house they were going to retire to. They had a real sense of, this is the wall, from their garden to the sea. It's a lesbian wonderland. And there was a beautiful church right next to them, you know, called Saint Brelade, which is really quite stunning. When I went to the house, I had to pretend to be a buyer so I could look at the house. It was for sale for $10 million. And that's a shot from their garden, but you actually, from the house, you can't see the water at all. And and posing as a billionaire, I had to say, $10 million on the bay with no view of the water. Call me American. I'm out. But I did get to go into their house and walk the seawall. See, right here is the seawall that the Germans actually built up. And when they retired there, they became the eccentric spinster sisters, which are an ancient form in Britain. Ancient spinster sisters or spinster companions can do whatever they want. They can fuck, and you would never know, because they're spinster sisters. So they kept taking pictures of themselves around, you know, their town. And this is my favorites. They did a sequence of cat photos where they took their cat took them for a walk. And if you notice, Claude is blindfolded on the top of a wall. And that was Claude. That was surrealism. Let's see where this is going to go. So then here comes the Nazis. Motherfuckers, here they come. And you know what? Because Hitler was like, well, British people are sort of Aryan. Let's make the islands into our holiday camp. Which the Strength Through Joy was their program of resorts for soldiers and Nazi killers. And so the rumor was that he sent his cutest and most charming troops to Jersey. And everyone said they were hot, because he wanted a model occupation. And it kind of worked for a few months. Like the local, look, there's a Bobby working with a German soldier. Here's like British kids wearing German caps. And, oh, we need some new stamps. It was very strange. And Churchill didn't talk about it much, you know, during even, because he basically gave up the islands because they were undefendable, and tens of thousands of people were left to be subjugated. Claude and Marcel were fucking furious at Churchill, and they're like, we're going to do something. Claude said, we're going to do something. So Marcel's like, we're older, there's no place to hide, there's no real resistance here, because there's no mountains or forests like in France. She said, she pulled out her gun, and she's like, well, I'm going to kill, no. Okay, then we're going to use our art. And in effect, they created a 4-year, 2-woman art resistance campaign that was really putting her money where her mouth was in terms of art is more effective than propaganda. And the first thing she did was she took a British penny and with nail varnish in German wrote on one side, "Victory never," and on the other, "War without end." And then just spent them, you know, in the fun fairs or whatever. So imagine being a 19-year-old German soldier and getting that. War without end. So she went directly to what they're really thinking. How would it end with this guy in charge? And they played up the old lady thing, shuffling around, and then slipped little notes into German pockets, put stuff on the graves of newly killed soldiers, saying, for him, the war is over. And then tagged all over the island without end. Ohne Ende. Almost like Banksy or something. It was just like, remember, you don't belong here. They broke into a German church, not German church, but that church I showed you, where the Germans actually worshipped. And at night they dragged in ladders, and as two old ladies put up a banner that said, for the Germans to read, that said, Jesus is great, but Hitler is greater. Because Jesus died for the people, and the people are going to die for Hitler. So again, made them think about what they were doing, made them remind themselves about their humanity. And they created all kinds of, little bits and pieces on cigarette papers. Marcel spoke German, so they could do this. They used different typewriters, so it seemed like it was hundreds of different people. This is Hitler as the Lorelei, which is a famous myth, German myth about the kind of the siren that calls the ships to break upon the rocks, and that's what Hitler is. So he uses this. They use this story of the Lorelei by Heine to point up the obvious parallels. Alarm, alarm. They would say things like, Hitler leads us, Goebbels speaks for us, Goering gorges for us, Himmler murders for us, who will die for us. You need to die. You Germans need to die so that Hitler may live a little longer. It just kept going. And they found that it was working because a local who sold them the cigarette papers betrayed them for £100. And people don't know much about these occupations because there were a lot of collaborators. And Churchill did not want to point that up, so he kind of swept it under the table. So they're arrested. It's 1944. The war's going against Hitler at this point. The Normandy landings were weeks after they were arrested, and this guy named Bode, who was the Gestapo-type guy, said, you are, they knew this was coming. They had suicide pills in their purse, and they took them. But because they were lesbians and Jewish, they didn't take enough, because it was cheaper. They're like, there's no danger of overdosing when you're trying to overdose, Claude. They both were in a coma for exactly 4 days. They're like, next time, don't stint. And that saved them because as they were recovering from that, the Normandy landings happened and the island was cut off. It couldn't get to France. So it was surrounded, in effect, and people slowly were starving, including the German soldiers, who, to their credit, didn't steal the aid packages from the locals. They did steal from the farms, but there was a strange balance. And because, as Claude knew, not to paint a broad stroke, but propaganda was very straight male, if you know what I mean. And the worst that can be is very spectrumy, if you know what I'm saying, not reading the room emotionally. And what their stuff was doing was going straight for the heart and understanding that German does not mean Nazi. American does not mean MAGA. So when people are like, "What they fought the Nazis on," well, yes, but the Nazis were still a small minority that had taken power. That was fascism. They were not the majority. The majority finally supported Hitler, but many of these soldiers were socialists before the war. They'd be shot if they went AWOL. And they read a lot of her work, and some of them deserted. And so they found themselves in prison with the soldiers who had read their propaganda, so to speak, and deserted. Claude and Marcel in some ways say, we never belonged anywhere with the Surrealists, with the Goys, with the Straights, with the whatever. The only community we really felt part of was in the prison. because everyone looked up to them, to these eccentric French spinster sisters. And they found out what they had done, and they're like, damn. And the young teenage boys especially, who didn't know what to do, but hated the Germans, became like their children to them. Very touching. In fact, 14 Jewish kids they tried to send them to Jersey before the war, the Kindertransport, and Jersey rejected them. 14 kids, because they called them, we don't want foreigners. Jersey could be very conservative. It was also called the incest capital of Britain. So some of these young teenage girls would meet some of these well-mannered German soldiers and really fall in love, and it wasn't about collaboration, it was about someone who cared. You know, they weren't betraying their neighbors, they were not wanting to be beaten by their parents, you know, and it was a fascinating, complex situation that Claude and Marcel, as queer people, understood faster. Here's an example. If you are a misfit, if you are hiding something about yourself when you're young, if you're judged by how you look, you understand from a very early age metaphor. You understand that there's a surface of things and then there's layers of reality that echo and reflect each other, but you know it's not simple. And that's why the outsiders often become artists that trades in metaphor, as well as journalists, scientists, people, the unloved, changing the world. So Claude's understanding of the complexity of the German people they were dealing with made their stuff very successful. And in jail, even the guards, the German guards, were like very respectful of them, and we brought you special food. And she's like, give it to the pregnant prisoner. She was a dyke after all. Give it to the fucking pregnant lady. Are you out of your mind? And Heinrich, yeah. You know, they almost like ran the prison. They couldn't get him out because, you know, those guards would be shot if but they were very sympathetic. And they also saw the war ending, you know. Even one of the Gestapo came in drunk and said, I probably will end up in this actual cell in a few months. But, you know, we are Germans, we have to follow the justice system. And she's like, why don't you just shoot me in the head like you've done with so many others? I'm not going to Auschwitz. And they're like, we are the Germans, we would never do that. And she's like, And then when they finally come down with the sentence, it's for having a camera and a radio, you are sentenced to 6 months hard labor. And for making propaganda, you are sentenced to death. And Claude's reaction was, which do we serve first? And there's nothing that Germans like less than to be made fun of from a high point. So they were brave as fuck. And they survived. They survived with the luck of having been apprehended after Normandy landings. They survived because of the kindness of the guards. They could have been killed at any moment. They were the last people released from the jail. You know, this was a little drawing they did on a cigarette pack of their cell. And I was in those kind of cells from that time. They're pretty grim. And one of the soldiers came to her, one of the German deserters came to her and said, I read your art and I thank you for it. And she's like, oh my goodness, I think you're partly in here because of us. And he's like, don't apologize, never apologize for the truth. Take my insignia. And he took off his eagle. She reluctantly took it, and he said, thank you. He left and was shot. So the first image that Marcel took after liberation, on Liberation Day, was this. So the complexity of this picture, too, you know, it's like, at first, it's like badass. Then it's like, complex. because humans are complex. And she went out into the Liberation Day crowd. No one really knew who they were then. They were leaving the only community they actually liked, the prison, into a group of people, many of whom had betrayed her and each other. And as soon as they were taken out of their house, their neighbors stole their stuff, as did the Germans. They had a Picasso, a Miro. They were taken and destroyed. And this is a picture of Royal Square, Liberation Day. There's Claude. Maybe the only one not smiling. Again, aware of the nuance. So they settled back into their house. It wasn't the same. Their neighbors, were suspicious. They were suspicious of their neighbors. And they thought about coming back to Paris, but Breton and Dali were now in the US. They were big stars. Gertrude Stein, who they knew somewhat, had turned out to be a bit of a collaborator. As a Jewish lesbian, she translated the anti-Semitic texts of Marshal Pétain, the Nazi puppet leader. Very disappointing. And others were gone. They were dead. And so they decided to stay, but Claude's health had been compromised by the prison. I'll just read to you a little bit of the ending of Nike, their cat. Let's see. I can read as I go. So at one point, here we go. Let's see. There we are. Claude left prison and entered the crowd in Royal Square. She found a world that remained full of kindness and betrayal as she moved through the throng. Strangers offered her draughts from dusty bottles newly exhumed from backyards. She drank, then stopped when she recognized a woman from her neighborhood. It was the shop clerk who sold them the cigarette papers, the neighbor who had collected 100 pounds in return for their heads. Well, perhaps she'd had children to feed. Claude let her go, as the rest of the woman's life would be her punishment. And after all, Claude was going home, and if home wouldn't take her, she would find a new room of their own. Claude and Marcel scoured the island for what had been looted from their house by both enemy and neighbor. They never found their signed first editions, their Picasso, their Miro, but they found some of their photographs, and one day Nike wandered in through a window, like it was just another rainy day. The women wept. Nike let them hug and kiss her, but was mostly not bothered. But then if your cat could talk to you, would it? I would, says Nike, but then I'm not a cat anymore. Nike has now become the goddess of victory. The women collaborated on more photographs. Marcel dabbled with fiction. Claude struggled with her memoirs. They considered returning to Paris. They were stars in America. Gertrude Stein had avoided justice by dying. Alice B. Toklas was forced to sell off the paintings the Germans had so carefully protected for them. Louis Aragon, the one who was the Stalinist, was hailed as a great poet of the resistance. Later, when his wife passed, he moved in with a man and rode a pink convertible in more than one gay pride parade. Never know thyself. 9 years after the war, Claude, physically weakened by her time in prison, fell ill and cradled in Marcel's strong arms. I moved on to my next role, which I doubt will be my final one. She was buried next door at St. Berlad's, where the first time a Jew was laid to rest in a Christian cemetery. She engraved a passage from the book of Revelation, and I saw new heavens and a new earth, and there was no more sea to take me away. Marcel says, I sold the house, moved to another part of the island. I lived on alone, except for Nike, for 18 more years, till her lives ran out, and ill health led me to claim the quietus I'd never quite managed after our arrest. I peacefully took my own life. They left no descendants nor estate, and the remnants of their work were auctioned off in 10 boxes for the sum of 21 pounds sterling. The boxes were left on a shelf until at the end of the bloodiest century on earth. They were discovered by those who needed them. The last breath has passed to us. And who of us can deny that art is simply the sad and tender attempt to recall love that is passing before our very eyes? So, their example as artists, as lovers, as activists, as putting their money where their mouth was, as queer figures that didn't ever want to be defined as one thing, should be an example to us right now. They weren't really known until the early 90s. So one academician discovered them, brought them into the world. But now I see people with tattoos of their work. So I would say, got any questions? Yes.
I've got a microphone for you here.
They force them on you here since COVID.
In the play, do you envision the characters being played by women and or men, or interchangeable?
Yes. Anybody can play Claude and Marcel. Anyone can play anything, in my view. But in this case, that was their philosophy. It's like they didn't want to be defined, and they loved the idea of the flow, which is in all of us. The term non-binary to me feels temporary. Nobody wants to be defined by what they're not. And I don't believe the binary is the default. I believe we all have energies that might be thought of as male and female in us. We can express them or we can't, or we don't. And if you let them be, if they're strong and you hide them, it's like that's an animal that got stuck in your wall, and it could very well die there and could very well stink up the house. Nobody wants to hang out with closet cases of any kind, right? You can closet different parts of your life. Not that you have to be everything at all times, but when you're crushing, we all know the difference. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious. I'm thinking about propaganda versus art, and also art and the resistance, and making a play now about Claude and Marcel, and how you think about them as models, but also keep them from becoming like trite, right? In this like era of like MAGA, and we're seeing authoritarianism, but there are these great human artists, and also, it's easy for us to reduce them to propaganda. And, I'm just really interested in that sort of like line between the art and the propaganda as resistance, as we fight fascism again in this world.
Well, you guys know, right? You guys know in Minnesota. Minneapolis, as I said last night, only Prince knew the revolution would happen in Minneapolis. And to me, it's like the Christian thing. You shall know them by their fruits. If they inspire people to do something useful, then they are useful. They never, there's no martyr syndrome with them. They were not interested in their legacy. They were interested in now, in what they could do right now.
Hi, John.
Hi.
A couple years ago, I was in Berlin, and I went to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And in the town outside of this camp, immediately, like one block over, there's still a large movement of white supremacists. They still get their names on the ballot in that town. And they go in and they've tried to burn down remnants. They've tried to burn down the museum, the memorial, and things keep moving. Things keep churning, generationally. How do you have a favorite? There's this continuing, like white supremacist fascism, but resistance, also keeps rolling on. Do you have in modern times, do you have a favorite work or group or resistance that you feel like you turn to when you see things continue to happen, like bad things continue to happen, people try to erase things like that?
I mean, I think there's so many different initiatives and groups of people doing good stuff, and I don't think of one. I also know that a lot of resistance has to be on a small scale in your life. A good deed at a time, a moment in the microcosm of your life, which was theirs too, just spread out. It's like you have to start local, otherwise it's overwhelming, right? It's just too much. What can you do to help that neighbor? What can you do to stop that library from banning its books? What is that small thing? Because the good people haven't gone away. It's just we know now who the opportunist liars are, because they're just sucking up to the emperor with no clothes, and that includes every motherfucking tech bro who pretended to be, the internet is going to save us all, and we're caring so much, and it's like, no. The Bezos, the Zuckerbergs, the Musks, they've all, and the Apple, they've all turned to bend the knee, and that is what always happens when in power and money, and that happened in Germany, and it happens here too, and so now we know who our real friends are, because there's no necessarily reward for being resistant, and in fact, there's danger to some to tell the truth. And again, the good people haven't gone away. Figure out what your version of punk is. When I was just going around colleges last year and meeting a lot of young people who were really quite stunned. I mean, we all can be stunned, but especially young people, right? Because it's like, I'm in training, don't kiss me. And I'm like, I've learned my jargon. I've learned what I'm not allowed to say in a world of, language police, which came from good intentions. The political correctness of that, especially academic world, came from true grievance, right? It came from true crap. But as anything, when there's this list of rules or there's some kind of power, it can forget what its point is and so you start getting a kind of a cancellation where, people, let's say a little bit more on the left, are less forgiving of a flaw, right? On the right, they don't read the fine print, they just want daddy to tell them what to do. So there's not as much of a purity test. We can throw out it's very hard for us to agree on candidates and platforms, which actually do have some effect, we can see, with a trifecta government right now in Washington, and to be more strategic. And I found that sometimes the identity politics, which came from a good sense, a good idea of justice, became its own kind of God, became its own religion in a way. And if you veered away from that, you are out. You don't conform to what I decide is, or the group has decided is great, you're out. And I think it started to shut some people down. I'm not going to say anything because I come from a historically privileged world, or do I have to say something because I come from a historically non-privileged world? It's like it starts to become absurd in its trying to fix things really fast. And that started heavily in the first Trump regime. But we start attacking each other, right? Because we can't deal with him. So we're like, you're not pure, you're out, stop that. and we start to be rats in a cage. And again, good things can happen with this awareness, but it started to become detrimental. And as Mark Maron said, we might have annoyed some people into voting more rightward, because it was like, don't tell me what to do. You know, Americans don't like to be told what to do in general. That's why I don't think fascism actually can fully take hold, the full authoritarianism, because even the MAGA people say, this was fun. It was like a sports, and now it's serious. Don't tell me what to do, and like, where's my gas prices? And it's like the absolute self-servingness. You can't spin inflation, can you? You can spin everything else. And in a world where, you know, all news is fake, what do we got left? We have stories. If all news is fake, if all facts are questionable, almost as a corollary, all stories are true. And that can mean the stupidest conspiracy theory that somehow explains why you don't have a job because of lizard people. It's funny how extreme we have to go. Your political opponent is not, I disagree with socialized medicine. Do they have to also be eating babies? You know, it's like, why do we have to go so extreme in this country? We vote in this country for celebrities and for celebrity theories. Elsewhere, they vote for policies, you know, which is why we're very different. And unfortunately, we need another fucking star to say the right thing. But the other side of the stories thing is, the one thing that almost everyone can agree on is these stories, which might be a play, which might be a TV show, which might be a song, everyone can agree that they want to consume those. And those are empathy factories. When you have a tech bro, the richest man in the world, saying our worst human weakness is our empathy, wow. Said it out loud. He wants to be a bot, and a bot will be more successful in the world. Successful in the way he's decided. This is the man who also decided he only wanted male offspring and got rid of the non-male embryos. And then, of course, one of his sons transitioned. Yes.
Hi. I'm thinking, this Pride, I've been thinking a lot about, there's so much theater in the Twin Cities, there's so many queer artists who are doing things like excavating figures from the past and speaking as or performing as these people, and I'm seeing this, or thinking of this as a kind of queer history or queer historiography in a way. And as a performer myself, I'm wondering what you might think of the line between being almost possessed by these figures, by Claude, or what is it like to be a conduit versus playing a character? Do you see a line between that, or do you think there's, you know, there's the artifice of performing as an idea of someone, and then there's really being open to being a conduit for a voice from the past?
Yes. Yes to all of that. You know, it's like, depending on the moment, for sure. I love being a conduit. I love introducing people to people that can be inspirational in some way, specifically, not always, but in the queer diaspora, you know, and I include even someone who pretended to be gay who really wasn't, David Bowie, who was definitely queer. You know, it's like these are all corollary people. They're all connected, and they're all inspired by the same people, you know. Bowie's favorite people were Little Richard and William Burroughs, you know. And so, and Little Richard, let's remember, a black drag queen invented punk rock. It's like, I was like, yeah, Chuck Berry, fine. Ike Turner, horrible. Little Richard. And so these people I think of in the same way as Little Richard. No one's perfect. I mean, they have their own issues. You know, Richard had trouble with the church, but they were brave, and they were the unloved who tried to change the world. Claude ultimately found that she was loved, and between them created beautiful stuff together. And that scene that I did with Alan, Don't Kiss Me, I'm in Training, by the end of the scene, the training was over, wasn't it? And we see Marcel as a kind of Svengali in a way in the play, but also becomes a bit of a third wheel as Claude becomes more forefront and more direct. There's an interesting part of the play where Marcel, what does it mean to be the handmaiden to genius? Which can also be hard. Yeah, so this, the play is just in an early form. I don't know, maybe I'll be in it. The other things I'm working on also have to do with the moment. There's a film about Allen Ginsberg in 1968, forming a kind of radical fairyish farm out in the woods for used poets, as he called it, and dealing with the Vietnam War in 1968, which really was a turning point in the 60s, when the peace and love started to collapse into assassination. And another one about Peter Staley, who was an ACT UP activist who helped save our lives in the AIDS crisis. So to me, these kinds of stories are vital. They're absolutely vital as fact and science become more and more disrespected. We saw, even just for queer people, we saw the general view of queer people change radically in about 15 years because of what? Scientists? No. Because of a president saying it was cool? No. Obama was late to that. It was because of stories, direct stories, and the stories that we learned from our family members, because as more people came out, we had a queer person in our family, and it wasn't a big deal anymore. It was like, whatever. Of course, there's always going to be a backlash to everything, and the fascist knows to go to the default scapegoats, which are queer people, immigrants, and non-white people. That is the go-to for white countries with fascism. And those of you who lived through AIDS understand that very directly and saw the direct results of that, of being left to die because of who we were. Somehow being told it was our wages of sin. And once we knew that wasn't the case, and I was a young man, what else have we been lied to about? Which doesn't mean I'm like the guy who's going into the conspiracy and finding everything. It's like, I'm still a pragmatist. It's like, sure that maybe aliens, helped get Trump elected, but I don't care. What do we do now? It's like, why must we go to the most outlandish question when, is it Occam's razor? The most obvious answer is usually true. And we don't need to embroider. Things are already crazy. It's hard to satirize this government, isn't it? There's no way, it's hard to make fun of it when every day there's another comic meme that is created without us, just by them. And unfortunately for him, like I said, the one thing you can't spin is your health care, your inflation, your gas prices, and that will do him in. And the danger is, of course, that we go down into the pit with him as he goes down too. What is he going to destroy on his way out? Hopefully just the Republican Party. Because they just were the lubrication to let him in there. All those people who knew he was the fucking devil, they let it happen for their lower taxes or their whatever, climate denial or, anti-abortion thing. They let the fucking devil in, and now he's going to destroy. He doesn't care about them. You can just see Mitch McConnell has dried into a husk because of his enabling of that motherfucker. Fuck him. Fuck him too. That's the wages. How are we doing on time? Probably about... Nikkei. Should we stop?
John?
Yeah, whatever, talk, speak.
Hey, over here. I was wondering if, with all of your research and exploration into these two artists, what would you say was the work that you returned to, or the piece of the playwriting that you found the most difficult? The one that you returned to or found challenging, that you had to wrestle with?
Aspects of their life?
Either that, or with like a favorite work that just stuck with you, or a part of the playwriting where you just weren't sure how to resolve it yet.
I mean, the story is so rich that it's more about how it's told, in what order it's told, and with what complexity, because there's so much, and I've done different versions that, like at the beginning, I put all the information up front that I could, and it was too much. So the more recent one is more about arranging it in a way that we can absorb it in smaller doses. This is maybe my favorite image. The subtitle is, "What do you want from me?" But it's also very much in keeping with her idea of a neo-narcissism, which was loving yourself but doing it with your collaborator. And Marcel was the perfect person for that. In fact, what happens when you do meet your other half? It's almost the sequel to Hedwig. And in her heroines, she also rewrote the Hermaphroditos myth, which is, the myth is of a nymph named Salmachus, female nymph who falls in love with Hermaphroditos, who was a youth that was the son of Hermes and Aphrodite, and she almost kind of rapes him, and he rejects her, and she calls upon the gods that they never be parted, and as a joke, he fused them together. Zeus fused them together for eternity. Hilarious. Which in a way is like, the other halves come together, but not against their will. And she continues the story, and they become objects of vilification, and they, as she describes, people of this sort, meaning, let's say, gender fluid people, have special shamanic powers, including the ability to see the future. And I love that metaphor, is that once you break from that society-given version of the binary and what you're supposed to do as a man or woman or whatever, that it allows you to see a new heavens, a new earth. It allows you to see a new future. And that is a gift of the artist and the person who uses their imagination, the scientist. And that very creation, using your imagination, is as much necessary to our soul's health as food is to our body. We are not allowed to use our imagination. That organ, the soul, can shrink and even die. And we know what that feels like when you've been around it. So to me, these are people who enlarge it, who encourage me to use my imagination.
Thank you again for being here today. And I have kind of a follow-on question from my friend here, and I guess related to our conversation last night at Parkway. As a student of history, when you find a story like this that was almost lore before the story passed into history, only to be rediscovered later, just as a researcher, which end do you start from? I grew up playing in Faulkner's Woods, and so one of my favorite sayings is, the past is never dead. In fact, it's not even past. So when you run across a story like this, do you start from where you are now and work your way back, or do you start with how it was at the time and bring it forward like you're bringing up a deep sea creature?
I think it's all of it at the same time. Obviously doing research, there's texts of theirs that hadn't been translated. I sort of figured out a way to translate it. And Claude and Marcel made pieces together, literary and artistic pieces, Vue et Vision, Les Jeux Uraniens, which meant the Uranian games. And it was constant, there was a flow happening all the time, but it was fun to kind of, this has never been translated. Who could translate this for me? And it was investigative work. and then going to their house. And one of the fun things I discovered was that became a metaphor in the play was the percage, which is the one unusual thing about Jersey is that they supported the restoration of Charles II to the throne, and he gave them two gifts as thank you. One was a piece of land in the New World that was eventually to give us Thomas Edison, Toni Morrison, and John Bon Jovi, the province of New Jersey. And the other was the right of percage. And that meant, in the medieval times, you could sometimes take sanctuary in a church if you had committed a crime. And in this case, it was codified. So if you committed a crime, you could stay in any church on Jersey for 8 days, and there was a cessation of hostilities. And then on the 9th day, you could decide to submit yourself to the royal court, or you could take the percage, which was this path from every church to the water. So here's the percage next to their house. Their house is literally 100 feet to the left. The percage, ancient sanctuary path of the parish church. And you would take that path to a boat, and it would sail you away forever. You could never return. So that was the rite of percage. And I use that as a metaphor in the piece. When they take their suicide pills, they go to a kind of liminal space, and Nike's like, are you ready to go? Are you ready to take the percage and be exiled from this life? And Claude is like, I'm not quite ready. So every time someone is nearing the end, we have a kind of metaphoric percage where Nike leads them down a kind of gangplank to the front of the stage, the lip of the stage. In effect, if you step off the stage, you are dead. The audience is dead people, or the future. So that's an example of something that came from just reading a book about someone who had lived through the occupation. They mentioned that. And Claude didn't, but I was like, this is a great metaphor. It's right next to their house. I walked through that gate. Who can speak loudest?
I can.
Say it.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming here and having a free event and warming my black little tranny fag heart with your Alan's special read. I'm just curious, who first introduced you to Claude and Marcel's work?
I don't remember, but like I said, there was that Bowie exhibit in the early 2000s and I saw an exhibit in Paris, and I'd always been aware of them starting in the early 2000s. And at one point someone said, you should make a film about them, but it was, there was too much. Doing a period piece, I know it would cost a lot, which means it would have to be less surrealist than I wanted. And, this play could certainly become a film at some point, but I want to start with as a play.
Will there be open auditions?
There's no production. There's nothing at this point. I do have a director, though. Yeah. Maybe we could do it here. I don't know. Yeah.
You got the opportunity to be able to go to the aisle?
Well, that's what I said. Remember, I went to their house and I was pretending to buy it.
Did you get to see that they do little Easter eggs to the village, or because it looks like they had a great sense of humor? Did they put their initials, or did they do paintings, or did they do carvings?
Not anything that exists.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. I really enjoyed seeing you in Kansas City a long time ago, a few years ago. So I didn't realize how much of Kansas City was actually in Hedwig, so that was really refreshing to see. But I can't hear. Oh, sorry. My question, first of all, the comment I'm getting from what you're saying is that the revolution might have actually existed nuance and in blurring identity, but and it's sometimes hard
Well, they certainly wouldn't have used it. They, you know, it would just smack to them of capitalism, another kind of control. They weren't interested in fame, money. They had a certain amount of money, so they were fine. They were interested in the work. You know, they were interested in helping. You know, they were interested in using what they could to make things better. But they were in no way interested in fame or money. So I think they would be very suspicious of this zeros and ones version of life, you know, this simulation. I was trying to watch one of the World Cup games after the fact, and there was a bunch. I was watching one of them, the first Scotland game. I'm like, this is strange. Like my internet. Then I realized it was a simulation. It was an AI simulation of the game, and there was dozens of versions of this specific game on YouTube, and they were just like these puppet people, and I was like, it's kind of shocked me. But there's going to be a lot more of that. You know, AI is going to be our God. It's going to be our internet, and we have to be careful about how much power we give it. I mean, reducing digital footprint is vital to any happiness, in my view, certainly to creative happiness, mental health, and anything else. It's like I'd never had a Facebook, you know, I've always been suspicious of things. Maybe my personal conservatism and political progressivism allowed me not to leap into technologies before they've been really tested and the dangers are clear. Like I didn't have a phone for a long time. I didn't have, you know, I'm still on AOL because nobody fucks with it anymore. And weirdly, AOL owned New Line Cinema, which put out Hedwig, so thank you, AOL. So it's reducing that stuff so that you don't get caught in that algorithm, you know? I don't want to train my algorithm. I would rather just do stuff in my life. And most of my time is trying to get people in the same room anyway, because you just feel better, you know, when you're here. And young people are still learning that again, you know, to get back in the same space. It's great, it's great. You feel a lot better. You just do. You don't feel like a cog in the matrix. How's one more question?
So many queer people have been erased and ignored, and their art ignored and erased. What was it about these two that you decided, I'm going to put years of research and labor into this?
Well, it's like, I mean, it's...
One thing that's like, I'm going to travel for this, I'm going to...
It's undeniable. Queer fascists in love, queer anti-fascists in love. I'm in. Yeah. Thank you so much. MIA. Thank you, Minneapolis.